Let's set over the details now. And of course, we are live on X Spaces, on YouTube, on Facebook, and of course on myjoyonline.com for those who are watching us beyond Ghana. Now, President John Mahama has assured public sector workers that if the economy recovers, it will ensure higher remuneration for them in the coming year. Now, President Mahama attended the National Tripartite Committee meeting at the Ministry of Labour, Jobs and Employment, where the government announced a 10% increase in base pay for public sector workers effective January. Additionally, the daily minimum wage has risen by 10% to 19 cedis 97 pesos effective March 1. We'll hear from the president shortly, but here is the Minister of Labour, Jobs and Employment, Dr. Rashid Pelpo, directing establishment to adjust their payroll to reflect the new minimum wage, else risk sanction.
Of the Labour Act 2003, Act 651, the National Tripartite Committee concluded negotiations on the determination of the 2025 national daily minimum wage at a meeting held on Thursday, 20th February 2025 in Accra. In determining the 2025 minimum wage, the National Tripartite Committee took into account the current economic challenges, cost of living, stability of businesses, and desirability of attaining higher level of employment as follows. An increase in the national daily minimum wage by 10% over the 2024 national daily minimum wage, which translates into a new national daily minimum wage of 19.97 Ghana cedis. The effective date for the implementation of the 2025 minimum wage shall be 1st of March 2025. All establishments, institutions, or organizations whose daily minimum wages are below the new rate should adjust accordingly. 5. Any establishment, institutions, or organizations that flouts the 2025 national daily minimum wage shall be sanctioned in accordance with the law. The National Tripartite Committee recommends that the 2025 national daily minimum wage should be tax exempt.
Well, President John Mahama gave us a glimpse into the kind of economy he inherited in January, and he's pledged higher minimum wage remuneration for public sector workers in the coming years once the economy bounces back. He also stressed the need to establish an independent emolument committee to determine the income of public sector workers.
You know, we are your natural allies, and we've worked together for many years. One thing that is a cardinal principle for us is to tell the truth at all times. We all knew the economy was in crisis, but some of the things I'm discovering myself, it's been a criminal handling of our economy. And Ghana is a crime scene, actually, because how a government can have been so reckless, I cannot understand. But we're faced with a reality, and our options are very few. We can behave like the ostrich and hide our heads in the sand and let the economy crash. But then what effect would it have on Ghanaian households and everybody? And so I've told him, I said, cut expenditure as much as you like. Even we ourselves in Office of Government Machinery, cut as much of our budget as you like, because we all must make those sacrifices. A certain distrust of the political class has arisen, because it's like when everybody else is tightening their belts, the political class is loosening its belts. But I want to assure you that we're all going to tighten our belts, and there will be no wasteful expenditure. It is said that we create and share. And so let's start cooking the meal now so that we can share when we have created. But right now, the meal is not only insufficient, the cooking pot is even leaking. And so I'll just appeal to you that let's temper our demands for this year. And once we get out of the woods, we've set good targets to bring inflation down so that the cost of everything will come down. We've set targets to grow the economy, to make things better. And when the cake is baked and is bigger, we'll share bigger. We are proposing an independent emoluments committee that would set the incomes for everybody from the president right down to the ordinary laborer. We are prepared to walk this journey with you, but I just appeal to you that let's reach agreement on this one so that we use this year as the year of correction. And then after we've corrected, we'll see how the economy continues to go. Once the economy moves in the direction that we are all hoping for, we all, if we have an independent emoluments committee, maybe if you suggest 35%, I'll support you because it will affect my pay too.
Right, so from eating the meat to the bone to now leaking pot, that is the state of the Ghanaian economy. But this is not the first time we are witnessing an increment in the minimum wage or the base pay. So we want to explore what the increment in the national minimum wage means for the average Ghanaians, especially because the National Tripartite Committee has recommended that the 2025 daily minimum wage be tax exempt. What does that mean? Joining me in the studio for that exploration is Kofi Ajay from our research and data department. So Kofi, you've got what, from 2012 to 2025?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've heard the president says that we now have, the pot is even leaking.
Yes.
The last time he made some reference to the economy was the fact that we had eaten the meat to the bone. Now, a leaking pot means that very soon everything will run out.
Well, also if you gauge the sentiment of the president or his mood, you realize that he knows what's at stake. Because if you analyze the country's expenditure for this year, what you realize is that compensation to employees alone is supposed to take some 36% of the expected revenue.
And that has come down. It used to be around 45 to 50%.
Yeah, it's because of the IMF program. In fact, even if you compare it to tax revenue, it becomes worse because now you'll be venturing into 50% of tax revenue.
Right.
Now I've been trying to get some clarity in terms of the minimum wage we see on the smart wall and as to whether it should be taxed. The clarity I'm getting is that the barest minimum, in terms of the minimum of the minimum wage should not be taxed. So, in fact, if you look at the current minimum wage of 19 cedis, 97 pesos, if you do the math, it means that a worker that is being paid that minimum wage should be earning, as the lowest should be somewhere 600 cedis.
600 Ghana cedis
exactly, a month. That means that that's 600 cedis. If you are paying 600 cedis to that person, it should not be taxed. But once it is stepped up and that person is earning more than that, then it begins to attract taxes.
What that also means that no worker in Ghana should be paid less than the minimum
less
wage.
Than 600 or 500, 599, roughly 600 cedis should not be paid less than that. What we've been tracking is that you can see how the upward movement in terms of the minimum wage has moved from 4 cedis, 48 pesos in 2012 to now 19 cedis, 97 pesos. There is some sort of positive correlation between the minimum wage and the dollar to the cedi.
Right.
What usually we see is that the minimum wage is usually around $1. And when it begins to go below the dollar, it's always critical.
Right.
But this year, even though the increment is 10%, what we see is that if you compare this 19 cedis, 97 pesos to the current dollar to cedi rate, which is around 15 cedis, 50 pesos, you can see that the gap is widening. So some positive news there. But you may look at it on the nominal values, but in terms of percentage-wise, what has been the story? The story is that...
if you can just go back
of course,
for just a second. I mean, if you look at it from the trajectory from 2012 up onto 2025, I don't know why the increment has always been 1 cedi. One cedi. The only time it went up was between 2023 and 2024, where it jumped from 14 cedis to 18 cedis. But it's always been 1 cedi.
So it's always been that, because you only see an outlier when you see the country in a very difficult situation. That is when labor will demand more. When you see inflation going up. In 2022, we saw inflation skyrocketing to as high as 54%. So if they are coming to the negotiation table, they will definitely come with a bigger, demand. Remember that last year, for instance, around this same time, we were talking about the 22% minimum wage and base pay increment. What Labour went to the negotiation table with was somewhere 60%. They ended up getting some 22%. This year, we've not seen some big fuss around the whole 10%. It means that Labour possibly feels that they are getting closer to what they may have wanted. And looking at how the president spoke, they may be aware that this is a turnaround time for the country. And he said that, look, let's start from this point. When things begin to get better, you may get what you may be demanding. But in terms of percentage change, Elton, and if you look at it from maybe 2015 to 2022, you can see that the average is usually around, let's say, 10% a year. Their only outliers was in 2013, definitely when a new government comes to power. 2020 when we had COVID, and you can see that it went back to the normal level of, between 6 to 10%. Then 2024 became the outlier in this period under review where we saw the base pay go up by some 22%. And now we are talking about 10%. Not just this. I mean, the bigger problem has to do with that projected 73 billion compensation of employees that government must pay this year. When minimum wage and base pay goes up, it's not just about what government is paying to the workers, but their social contribution as well. And now that we are under an IMF program, definitely it means that government has also gone into conclave with the fund. The fund were in town somewhere 2 weeks ago, right? They just left, I think a week ago or so. So they may be aware, some of these things, there can be a unilateral decision. Government must get the buy-in of the fund. It must fit within the current framework that we have under the IMF program. So definitely the president was right when he said that, look, the situation doesn't look good at the moment because usually, especially the first quarter, government will have to borrow to pay workers. And we all know how there is no local bond market at the moment. The only market function at the moment is the Treasury bill. If you decide to go to the external, the IMF has placed a borrowing cap of $250 million on that. So it's interesting to see how government will maneuver its way around this.
Just some 2 questions before I let you go. So you are saying that compensation for this year is around 70
is projected around 73 billion Ghana cedis.
And that is in terms of percentage to
that's about
overall revenue generation.
That's about 35% of the projected revenue.
We do not know how much government is projected to collect in the year of 2025 because the budget has yet to come.
I mean, but they give a sense in the IMF program. The last review that was done in December 2024. Remember that currently we are under the fund program. So even the budgets, there's already a framework that government will just have to fill in. The projected revenue is somewhere around 209 billion Ghana cedis. And you are going to spend 73 billion
on compensation. Do you know how much of that money will go to service interest on loans?
Interest on loans, unfortunately, is around 142. No, I think interest on loans, if you add it to the debt servicing this year is around 142 billion Ghana cedis. So just compare
if you add the 72 billion Ghana cedis to it, that we are looking at almost 200.
That's more.
So that's like almost compensation and interest
taking away the entire projected revenue.
So where is the room to undertake all the massive development and all the commitment that government have to undertake?
I mean,
especially in 2025?
That really puts pressure on the local capital space where T-bills and all of that. And when this happens, it means that government would always and all the time have to start coming to the T-bill market. And you cannot reduce the rate because once you reduce the rate, it no longer becomes attractive for people to borrow to government. And once the rate is also high, it keeps the private person away. So it's an interesting situation at the moment where because government still needs money from the Treasury bill market, they have to keep a rate to attract investors. There are private persons who also want to get into this space. They want to make sure, they want to wake up one day and hear that interest on loans is around 19% or 18%. But because of governments, wanting to finance that big deficits, they always would have to go to the treasury bill market because the local bond market is no longer there. And the IMF is projecting that government should start or gradually start issuing domestic bonds in the next quarter, which is just about 2 months away, right? So that's the situation at the moment for the country.
Thank you so much for coming too. But the man who is privy to the figures, in fact, one of them, and he's also in a very, unique position in terms of determining how much as a worker you should earn. Joining me in the studio is the Chief Executive Officer of the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission, Benjamin Arthur. Mr. Arthur, good afternoon and welcome to the Pulse.
Good afternoon.
So I saw you at the news conference with the Labour Minister and, of course, President John Mahama. First of all, I mean, when the President makes the point that we are not in a very good place in terms of our economy and the revenue that comes in, or what we are saddled with right now, what is the message here?
Thank you very much. Let me take this opportunity to greet our viewers. I do not think I could paint the picture better than what the President did. But for us, at the table, we were not just looking at cost of living. We were also looking at the economic circumstances which the Sector Minister for Employment, together with the Minister for Finance, had adequately explained. So when we fix wages, it's not just the cost of living. We must, sometimes when we discuss it in the media space, we forget that government plays a lead role when it comes to employment. So whatever we do in the public sector has a ripple effect on the private sector. So if you come into government with the aim that you want to generate jobs, you want job opportunities for the teeming youth who happen to not get opportunities to be employed, and you are very mindful of that, you will equally be mindful of how you fix wages. The national minimum wage is a minimum wage floor. When we are fixing it, I'm a member of the tripartite committee. So I'll speak briefly on that. When we fix it, we are very mindful that you don't fix the wages in such a way that the businesses that will provide opportunities for labor to be employed will equally be collapsed. So you have to be very mindful of their circumstances. And they are not operating in isolation. They operate under the economic environment prevailing. So definitely you have to be very mindful of that. We're equally mindful of sustainability. That where are you going to raise the revenue? So it's not as if I'm looking at merely transportation costs. I'm just looking at what it takes for me to feed myself and my family. You must equally be concerned as to how that business could be sustained for you to continue to draw your rewards per exchange of your skills. So that is also very key. So you don't fix minimum wages because it pleases one party to say that give me 50, 30, whatever percentage. So we must also come to understand that the mechanism for determining the national minimum wage and any other wage in public sector dwells on negotiations. So once you hear a certain percentage, what it means is that the stakeholders, the parties,
all came to that conclusion. I'll come back to ask what went into coming to that figure of 10%. But let me first ask you, so in practical terms, and for somebody who is watching right now, probably jubilating, every worker who earns a salary or some wages at the end of every month should see a 10% increment. Is that what it means? Or this is practically for the public sector for now, and the private is, they have the room to decide as to whether to go with it, because this is just the basic.
Okay, for you are speaking of the minimum wage. But I'm for the base pay. Fair wages is set up for public sector pay. Not private. The minimum wage is of uniform application. To public and private sector. What it means that government is not able to fix the minimum base pay that will be below the minimum wage. So that is a guiding principle. But in the public sector, what we do for the base pay will not dictate
the minimum
to those in the private sector. I hope you get it.
I get it.
We cannot dictate to the private sector as what exactly they do. But by law, when there's a minimum wage, determined, you cannot go below that.
Exactly.
That is where the minimum wage stocks. But for
basically,
us,
nobody should go below what has been established or set by
once it's set,
the committee.
It's law. When you read the Labour Act, once the minimum wage is set, it's law. It's binding on all of us. And that's how come government is not able to fix the lowest base pay below the minimum wage. So oftentimes, you realize that we will first finish with the minimum wage for it to be a guide for the base pay negotiations. And that is what has happened this year as well.
But you know that, I mean, in this country, there are so many millions of people who are paid way below what is established by law.
For a day.
Yes.
What it means that the enforcement needs to be wide.
Exactly. Exactly. There are people who are paid 300 Ghana cedis, 200 Ghana cedis a month. Sometimes even getting the money is difficult, even though they are aware that this is what has been set by law, but they operate below it.
That is another forum for discussion. But for us to address this, there is an entity under the Labour Ministry called Labour Department. And I'm sure when they go for inspections, they are careful to do so. But sensitization is very key in this matter.
Tell us the pillars that were considered in arriving at the percentage.
For the national minimum wage, because it's under the tripartite, I wouldn't want to dwell so much.
Are you a member?
Yes, I'm a member, but I'm not the official spokesperson. For that, the chair is the sector minister. I'm the CEO of Fair Wages and Salaries Commission. So if you do not mind, maybe we may have to shift the conversation from the national daily minimum wage
to the base pay.
To the base pay.
Okay, let's do that.
Where I have my mandate.
Let's do that then.
Okay, thank you. Normally, when you hear the 10% that government has increased wages by 10%, it is not exactly the case. It's much more than that. Simply because government is equally, mandated to pay the 13.5% social security contributions. So the increase that we have given, there's an additional amount that government must find and add. So for every 10 Ghana cedis or 100 Ghana cedis that we give, we are giving 13.5 Ghana cedis, right. 13.5 Ghana cedis. I just gave you this practical example so that you appreciate. So if government says that I'm increasing your 1,000 Ghana cedis by 10%, what it means is that 100 Ghana cedis is coming to add. In addition to that, government is going to find an additional fund of 13.5% to add to the 100 so that your social contribution will be paid. It does not also end there. There are some allowances that are annexed or indexed to the base pay. So as soon as the base pay goes up by 10%, those allowances that are indexed to the base
are also affected.
So to government, there is that extra, commitment.
And that obviously is good news for public sector workers.
So definitely. So when you hear the 10%, it's not just a mere 10%. It's much more than that because this is only the base. But the allowances that are indexed to the base equally will receive their, increases.
Has the numbers been worked out to say that because of this increase, this is how much pressure of this, how much is added to the
wage bill?
Exactly.
Oh, definitely. Without doing this, the finance minister could not come and make a commitment on behalf of government that government is ready to spend this much in public sector wage bill management or in terms of payroll issues. Obviously, if you have not done that, you cannot come out.
You cannot agree on that.
You want to.
So, Mr. Atta, how much of burden is this imposing on the public purse?
Oh, we are looking at over 4 billion.
4 billion Ghana cedis.
Yes, just for the 10% on the base. We're looking at 4 billion. You see, we've gotten to a point where we must accept that when I say we, in government and our public sector workers, we must accept the challenge that we cannot continue, borrowing to pay public sector workers. So the challenge was thrown to all of us. His Excellency, for the first time in the history of base pay, the president of the land showed up to come and, give some backing, explain to organized labor and our good selves as to what the situation is. Of course, we have also had the presence of the finance minister at all the meetings, and these were adequately expressed. Organized labor understood that there is a need for us to do burden sharing in order to move forward as a country. You know, when you increase wage bill and you're also borrowing to pay, what it means is that you are going to look for more money. So why must we look for more money when our colleagues who are receiving the money can also help us lessen the burden? And that is what organized labor has demonstrated today, that they are with us. We need to build a country together.
And
so
I must say that
it's a consensus.
Yes, and I must also add that this obviously will go down as perhaps one of few meetings at the tripartite committee that we didn't see so much disagreement, especially in the public space. This is the
Public Services Joint Standing Meeting Committee, not the tripartite.
Right.
Tripartite is for minimum wage. This one is the Public Services Joint Standing Committee, for which I chair.
But not much agitations came out of it in the run-up to agreeing on this.
Oh, yes, definitely. If the circumstances, the engagement is managed very well, you do not expect any level of agitations. You see, there's one thing that may not be known to the general public. For us, an organized labor, we have a common interest to advance this nation.
Right.
It's a common interest. We do not have differences. But how the distribution should be done,
that's where the issue is.
That is where the issue is. So when we explain our issues very well, when I say we, it's not just the government side, but also with organized labor. In fact, government would have wished that organized labor will forgive us any percentage, at least for this year. But we also understand the economic circumstances and the cost of living.
Absolutely.
So definitely we have to, more or less do some burden sharing for us to have some amicable settlement. So it's the goodwill we have towards each other. That's why you don't hear the news that some of you are actually looking for.
But I mean, this week, for example, I was reading this report by the Ghana Statistical Service, and they come to the conclusion that if you look at the public payroll, about 80% of persons on it earn somewhere around between 2,000 and 3,000 Ghana cedis a month. And clearly, in the state of affairs in this country, 3,000 Ghana cedis a month for a lot of people is woefully inadequate. Fair wages, you come in here because your job, look at how best we can remunerate public sector workers to give off their best. When you reach such reports, what does it tell you? That we are still a work in progress, or we are paying what according to the output that we get, or there's still more that we can do to make public sector workers better?
I don't know if we have the time to discuss this, but the president summarized the state of the economy by describing it as a pot
that is leaking.
He described it as a pot that is leaking. So anything that we are fetching to pay public sector workers is from the pot. Article 36 of our Constitution gives the principles for payment. Payment is matched to productivity. What this country does, the revenue we raise, our abilities to sustain it, is what should be one of the key guiding principles for payment. So, for example, if our GDP growth is 4%, our revenue is growing below 15%, growing below 10%, and you're asking for wages 30% and beyond. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, where are we going to raise the money to be able to pay? And we are not the only people who understand this mathematics. Organized labor also understands this, for which reason when we meet and dialogue, we are able to reach consensus. So it's not as if that living conditions are extremely too bad, for which reason the employer in this circumstance, government, is not being sensitive to the plight of public sector workers. That's not it. There's another condition. It has to be fair and realistic. And it is enshrined in our Constitution. So how realistic is the wages that we're paying? And that is one kind of balance that we need to introduce into this conversation. It's not just the fairness, it's not what the cost of living should entirely be, but how sustainable should it be for us as a country? So we are speaking to our realities as a nation. And I'm sure when we have a very sound economy, where our GDP goes up, revenue is going up, I am sure government will be very careful to take good care of its employees. So you have to look at, I don't know if you understand mathematics very well. In every equation,
yes,
you have the left-hand side of it and you have the right-hand side. To the left, if I may land,
right.
To the left, where we are drawing all the explanations from, is the revenue, sustainability.
All right.
And to the other side is how we'll be able to look and seek the welfare of our people.
We'll look at how best
so
we'll deal with
it's
this
a balance.
Because I know that last year, for example, you started the process of, reviewing the structure and then also the removing of names that are not supposed to be on it. But President Mahama is holding his first cabinet meeting at the Jubilee House. Let me take you live to the Jubilee House now as the spokesperson for the government explains what is at stake for cabinet, and then we'll come back to deal with the labor issues.
With the president. Now, apart from these 19 ministers, other ministers are made to attend. And so you find that the description for that would be in attendance. So the following ministers were in attendance at cabinet today. So the Minister of Sports and Recreation, the Minister of Youth Development and Empowerment, the Minister for Fisheries and Aquaculture, Minister for Tourism, Culture and Creative Arts, Minister of State in charge of special initiatives, and my good self, the Minister for State responsible for government communications, the Minister of State for Climate Change and Sustainability, and Minister of State Public Sector Reforms. So this essentially is the composition of those who attended cabinet today, in addition to the cabinet ministers. Now, today's session primarily was to introduce cabinet and ensure that people have a handle on what exactly the expectation is of them in cabinet. The ground rules were set out, and important briefings on matters relating to governance took place. There were a number of briefings. The first, of course, as should be expected, was a briefing on security, the state of security in the country. So the Minister for the Interior, the Minister for Defense, and the National Security Coordinator took turns to brief cabinet on the security situation in the country. And the general view emanating from the briefing was that Ghana's security was strong. We are a safe country, and people are free to go about their normal activities without let or hindrance. And whatever threats exist, our security agencies have the capacity to deal with. So Ghana was declared safe from the briefings that were made at cabinet today. The second briefing was made by the presidential advisor on the 24-hour economy and accelerated export development, Mr. Guzitano. He briefed cabinet on preparations so far towards a full rollout of the 24-hour economy. And one was left with the impression that tremendous work had gone into what is arguably President Mahama's foremost transformation plan, which aims to convert the Ghanaian economy from its present state into one that never sleeps and works around the clock. The briefing from Mr. Tano and his team shows, I beg your pardon, that we are on course to ensuring a smooth takeoff. And in due course, the 24-hour secretariat would be engaging the Ghanaian media so that through you, they can apprise the people of Ghana as to where things stand. And the president and everybody else in cabinet was highly confident that based on the roadmap that had been established, we were on course to achieving the objective of having a 24-hour economy. The final briefing was made by the minister responsible for finance. As you may be aware, we campaigned strongly on Ghana's failing economy. And indeed, our fears were borne out when the finance minister made his briefing. The situation is dire. The numbers are even worse than we had known in the period of the elections. But the minister the president, and others involved in the management of the economy were confident that the proposals, the policy propositions, and the program that President Mahama has put on the table were sufficient to turn around the situation and lift the pall of economic hardship and despair that has hung over this country and its people all these years under the new Patriotic Party, where economic mismanagement and imprudent decision-making was commonplace. In a few days' time, President Mahama will be addressing Parliament. He will be delivering a message on the state of the nation to Parliament, and he will take the opportunity to delve deep into our current economic state, what we inherited, and what plans there are going forward to ensure economic revival and resuscitation. A few days after that, the National Economic Dialogue will take place from the 3rd to 4th March, and there too, various stakeholders in our economy, drawn from academia, civil society organizations, public servants, public officials, and other interested parties in the Ghanaian economy will meet to deliberate on the state of affairs. And there too, further insights will be shared on the state of the economy and how we can collectively achieve consensus on the steps that need to be taken to ensure that we get out of the situation and are on the road to rapid economic growth and development. And then on the 11th of March, the finance minister will present his first budget, which would again explain the situation and indicate what government's policies are in respect of the economy and what measures will be rolled out going forward to achieve the objective of getting us out of this economic mess. So this, in a nutshell, is what transpired in Cabinet today. I would pause here and invite questions from the media present. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I would welcome them at this stage.
The first one has to do with security. You said the briefing that His Excellency the President had some assurances that the country was safe and that everything with respect to security was, for want of a better word, top-notch. But we know the situation in Boku, the Wale enclave is nothing to write home about. That cannot be described as we being in the safe, so to speak, space.
Well, those are isolated incidents of chieftaincy, land conflicts. And at the cabinet session today, the security chiefs were on hand to provide an update on the steps that have been taken to, as it were, bring the situation under control and ensure that they do not recur. So all that was part of the briefing. If you take out those isolated cases of conflict, which in any event predate the coming into power of this government and have been raging for decades in some instances, the general security situation is safe, and one can be confident that we can go about our activities peacefully as a people.
Do we get a sense as to what approach the government wants to have with the issue on the conflict around that area?
I think that President Mahama himself has indicated that he remains committed to resolving disputes such as the Boku conflict and others that are in various parts of the country. He has spoken about the need to use dialogue and stakeholder engagement as a tool towards achieving lasting peace in these areas, in addition to deploying security measures, deploying intelligence measures to ensure that early warning signals are picked up and they are attended to expeditiously to forestall the outbreak of violence. And where there is some outbreak of violence, we respond rapidly to bring it under control, to preserve life and property.
Okay. My question is on energy. You mentioned that the energy minister is part of cabinet. I want to find out, WAPCO announced that it was starting with its PN exercise, I think, some days ago. And we were told that fuel had been procured to make up for the shortfall that was expected. In recent times, we've heard some complaints about intermittent power supply in some parts of the country. And if you scan through social media, you get that concern as well. I want to find out if the issue of intermittent power supply, as has been suggested on social media, came up at this meeting, and what has been done to resolve the challenge, if there is any.
What I can say is that the energy minister is aware of the situation, and in the coming days he will be engaging the public on what the threats that we faced at the very onset of this government, which related to the closure of the West African gas pipeline and the failure of the previous government to meet its obligation of providing fuel for thermal power generation, was averted. Government has brought in adequate supplies of fuel, but it is important from time to time to engage the public to address concerns that they may have with the power situation. The Energy Ministry will be doing that in the coming days.
Okay, Minister, my question has to do with the CLOSAC strike. We saw the Labour Minister part of today's meeting. Is it the case that that issue didn't come up? And if indeed it came up, what was the response to that issue?
Well, what I'm aware of is that today's meeting involving the tripartite committee, at which the finance minister, the labor minister, and in fact the president were present, discussed the fixing of the minimum wage and determination of the base pay. That was the agenda of the meeting that was held this morning. As for the CLOSAC strike, I think government's position has been made clear through the briefing that I made yesterday, and I do not anticipate that it will change. Thank you very much for coming.
Right, so you've been watching live proceedings from the Jubilee House. President Mahama just had his first cabinet meeting where the composition was made known, and then some additional ministers that may not have cabinet status but are allowed to participate in cabinet meetings. Now, some of the things that went down during the first cabinet meeting, the president was briefed about the security situation in the country, and according to Felix Kwachofosu, the government spokesperson, Ghana is safe, and the security is doing everything to ensure the continued safety of the country. He was also briefed about the roadmap towards the implementation of the government 24-hour economy program by the person responsible for this, Mr. Gutitando. And according to Felix Kwachofosu, Cabinet was happy with the roadmap that is being rolled out towards the full implementation of the 24-hour economy program. And then the finance minister also updated Cabinet on the state of the Ghanaian economy. Now, we've been told by President Mahama today that even though he knew that the economy was not in good stead, what he is now learning about is even more dire. And for that reason, in the coming days, at the State of the Nation address, he will lay bare the facts confronting Ghanaians as far as the management of the economy is concerned. And finally, on the 11th of March, the Finance Minister, Dr. Kesela Tufoso, will present the 2025 budget to the nation, and again will spell out some of the interventions that government is hoping to implement to resuscitate the Ghanaian economy. So these are the key matters that came up during the first cabinet session of President Mahama. I will bring you more in subsequent bulletins on this. Mr. Benjamin Alta, CEO of Fair Wages and Salaries Commission, is still my guest here in the studio as we begin to wrap up. So before we went on that break, we were talking about the payroll. And you've been doing a lot of payroll monitoring. You started last year, you updated on how much the monitoring is helping to save the public purse. What is the latest on that?
Well, thank you very much. We started this exercise in 2023. We did it for, I think since April 2023, we did it for the whole year. And in the first quarter of last year, we intensified it, slowed down a bit, because we had to come back, do all the analysis and make sure that where we had seen the anomalies, I call them anomalies, had to be corrected. This year, we want to continue with a massive engagement on that, because we believe that to save this country a lot of money. Last year, we made a lot of savings.
Like how much, for example?
Last year, it was 345 million.
From the monitoring exercise?
Yes, but you see, it has other benefits of improving on productivity and the rest. Because what we do, maybe if we have some other opportunities, we may shed light on that. We go out to collect comprehensive information, go out on the field to do some monitoring. We also monitor the payroll. Where we have had a challenge had to do with those who are managing their own payroll with their own IGF. Like,
for example, state-owned enterprises that pay their own workers.
That pay their own workers with their own internally generated funds.
Like VRA,
some of them,
ECG,
yes,
and the rest.
Come to understand that we need some policy direction to be able to curb some of the excesses. But I can tell you...
Excesses like what exactly?
When I say excesses, I continue to use this funny example where an individual was collecting vehicle maintenance allowance. We just wanted to check what type of vehicle that vehicle should be or has been. And it happened to be a tractor.
Tractor?
Yes, it was a very funny situation.
Using tractor as a saloon car?
So quickly we took the individual on and ensured that whatever the individual had received was returned. We've also had cases...
And for how long had you used tractor as a saloon car to receive allowance?
I think it was for some number of months, you know. We've had cases where people were using government accommodation. They were in government accommodation and kept on receiving rent allowance. We had to stop some of these things. We have had cases, especially with people having multiple, date of birth. Some of them were too clear that they just wanted to stay on the payroll for as long as they wish. In fact, we came across individuals who even had 4 different dates of birth.
Same person on the same public payroll.
Same person.
So, I mean, what because of that, he was receiving double salary or something?
No, most of these cases had double, multiple dates of birth. What it means is that if your actual date of birth will lead to your non-existing on the payroll, by you remechanizing your date
you will
of
still
birth,
be there.
that you will be there.
Meaning you prolong your retirement.
Definitely. So there were also cases of delayed communication of exited staff. One individual exits, and the time it takes to communicate the exiting of the person, for the person to be removed on the payroll, is too long to some extent that sometimes a month or so the individual has received something. We had cases where whistleblowers were helping us. So we want to intensify that because we believe that at least about 8% of what we pay in the public sector can be saved. And when we started doing the payroll monitoring, the analysis, showed that for 2023 and 2024, whilst the employment levels, the staff levels were going up, the rate of increase was dropping.
Right.
And I must commend two institutions.
The monitoring is working.
Oh yes, 2 institutions who have been very key in this exercise. The Controller and Accountant General's department has been very key, and our key ally in this internal audit agency has been very, very helpful. Going forward, the payroll monitoring has taught us a lot. Of course, we also saw some anomalies of people who were entitled to some allowance
and were not getting,
who were not receiving. Some of them didn't even know. So those ones we had to, correct. It was an avenue for people who more or less had not had their...
But in terms of what we have come to describe as ghost names, is there a number as to how many ghost names you've taken off the public payroll through the monitoring exercise?
Oh, yes, we have had instances like, but I don't have the numbers right with me here.
Is the number in the thousands?
Yes, in the thousands. When we did it for the 2 years, when you compare, because you can't save that much if there were no ghost names. But you see, we Ghanaians like the term ghost names, but they can be described variously. So we call it payroll fraud. So whether you happen to earn above what you're entitled to, we will want you to come to the real level. The reason being that if we do this exercise, those who are really entitled to what they earn will feel good. Because if somebody is not doing anything and is also receiving pay, he's on payroll, he doesn't appear at the workplace, has basically abandoned the work. Some of them might have even gone on steady leave without pay, and yet they are receiving pay. You want to be able to check all this. But one key area that we have been very interested in is not just doing the payroll, but we are also interested in matching pay
productivity
to performance and productivity. And for the past 2 years, we have been working on that. Last year, God being so good, we were able to collaborate with Public Services Commission, which collaboration is still ongoing.
Ms. Atta, will you say that the payroll is so overbloated?
For me, and what we discovered, because we did only 4 regions.
Oh, out of the 16?
Yes.
Meaning 12 more to go.
Only 4 regions.
And that saves us over 300 million.
And even for the 4 regions, we focus on 3 key areas. There are very key areas that we have not even gone there yet. So we believe that even for 4 regions with 3 key areas, we did a total of 102 institutions. But some of the institutions do not have many satellite offices across the country. So if we did it for 4 regions, and these were the dividends, obviously, if we do it for even the same 4 regions with spread to other areas, I'm sure we'll be able to do that. But because we are interested in the savings, this has been our approach. We serve notice to ask management to do their own payroll monitoring to weed out the chaff, even before we come in.
But the issue here also is that, for example, what the OSP did regarding the Ghana Education Service, where some 6 people have been put before court to answer for whatever wrong they did in, bloating the public payroll, especially in the northern region, part of the Bonavo region. What you discovered, does it end there, or you make recommendations for punishment for, because this cannot be done by just one. There probably may be a syndicate somewhere that is benefiting from this.
Well, let me share some information with you here. When we started doing the payroll monitoring, our key challenge was when you find some anomaly, how do you address it? We didn't have prosecutorial powers. So what we did was that you refund the money. So we write to management. You see, you remember us and the GBC case. We will write to management and put the burden on management for management to correct same. The reason being that the individuals don't put themselves on public sector.
Right, very true.
They go through a channel. So we are not just looking at the individuals. We are looking at the individuals through the lens of their management. So when we see anomalies, our first instance is to address it to management to correct it. When after a reasonable time we find out that management has not acted, that is when we begin to trigger what we have,
Okay.
But our focus is to save for this country the necessary amount of money that we need, so that when those who are working come back to us that they want better pay, at least we should be able to find some resources to do so. But once you've hit this matter on your platform, let me take the opportunity to appeal to public sector organizations and their managers that if somebody is not deserving of what is being paid, you need to check against it. If somebody has gone on retirement and the individual is still being validated for pay, you should know that you are in the wrong, you have to correct it. There are times that people are validating people in some satellite offices that they don't see the people they are validating. Because some of the entities are large, they are scattered around the country, people have been transferred to areas, they are the validators, and yet they validate people they don't know.
Right.
So we want management to begin to address some of these concerns. Because you see, if you are not producing, but you are receiving, it's unfair.
Absolutely.
It's very, very unfair that you will be receiving pay for virtually nothing done, and those who are actually giving themselves their very best are also receiving the same pay. It's not fair. So we want to be able to address this. But the first group of people for me to address, and we'll be writing to all the public sector entities very soon, is the management bodies, for them to take the necessary action to ensure that when you are going to validate an individual for pay, you must be sure
the person
that
actually
that individual
exists.
is deserving, that the person exists.
And actually working.
And actually working.
So this year, I expect that the Fair Wages, the Commission will do more in this area.
We will do more. We will do more. We are just praying that we will have the necessary
resources to go about it.
To be able to. But we are optimistic. We'll have it and do more.
Just one more question before we say goodbye. CTAC, last year, I mean, the amount, I don't know how far you've gone in resolving. There's also the laboratory, you know, the professionals.
Okay.
What is the update on CTAC and the laboratory
professionals? We do not have any outstanding issue with laboratory professionals. Neither do we have it with CTAC. Early this year...
Meaning everything is resolved?
Yes. Early this year, we were able to migrate the CTAC. It's not just CTAC and SENSAC.
Right.
Let me just simplify the teaching and the non-teaching staff of the colleges of education. We have successfully migrated them to the public universities payroll.
Right.
The outstanding issues has to do more with those who have qualified to be placed after the HR audit. You know, the HR audit was done within a certain period. But each day, each week, each month,
new ones
are coming. So for those ones, we have received the data from GTEC, and we've worked on it, and I'm sure when finance works on it, it will definitely go to controller. So we are.
And I hope those people will not be affected by the government directive that certain individuals who were employed on a certain period should be taken off the public payroll.
Those ones, you know, we do not come in. We do the management of the wage bill.
Okay.
Employment policies and the rest are in the mandate of others. But for us, we want to be sure that you have been properly placed there, and that you are deserving of what you are receiving.
Okay.
That's our concern.
Mr. Benjamin, I wish you the very best for the year 2025 as we embark on this project to rate the public payroll of unwanted names. We will take a short break here. When we come back, we will still stay on labor matters because ClockSack, even though they've been promised 10% increments in the base and the minimum wage, they are on strike for a different reason. We'll touch base with our correspondent on how that is impacting on the work that they are expected to do when we return.